You know that feeling when you're sitting in your backyard, minding your own business, enjoying a quiet evening with your family, and suddenly you hear the crunch of boots on gravel where they don't belong? That's exactly what happened to me last Tuesday. Not just any boots, those annoying little golf cart tires and the squeaky rubber soles of HOA patrol members who think they own the neighborhood. What they didn't know was that my grandfather had been waiting for them. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because you're about to witness the most satisfying HOA takedown involving electrical engineering, property rights, and the sweet sound of justice delivered with 5,000 volts of "Get Off My Lawn." Let me introduce you to Ben Carter. That's me. I'm 42 years old, a high school science teacher in suburban Atlanta, and the proud owner of a modest three-bedroom home on a quiet cul-de-sac in the Oakwood Estates community. My grandfather, whom we all called Pop, is 78 and has lived in this house since it was built in 1987. Pop was a journeyman electrician for 45 years before retiring, and he's the kind of man who believes in three things: hard work, the Constitution, and making sure his tools are always in their proper place. When Pop built this house, Oakwood Estates was a peaceful community of families who respected each other's space. The HOA was minimal, just enough to maintain common areas and make sure nobody painted their house neon green. But things changed when the corporate developers bought out the original homeowners association and installed their own management. That's when the HOA patrols started, and that's when our problems began. I've spent my career teaching teenagers about scientific principles, critical thinking, and the importance of evidence-based reasoning. So when the HOA started crossing boundaries, literally, I knew exactly what to do. This wasn't about revenge. It was about establishing clear boundaries, documenting everything, and using the law to protect what's rightfully ours. Let me introduce you to Brenda, the enforcer, Wallace, 55 years old, head of the Oakwood Estates Patrol Committee, and the kind of woman who drives a golf cart with custom decals and treats HOA regulations like the 10 Commandments. Brenda's got that particular brand of suburban aggression that Atlanta residents perfect around age 50. You know, the kind where they'll quote neighborhood covenants while violating your privacy and somehow make it sound like they're protecting democracy. Brenda's married to a county commissioner, which should tell you everything you need to know about how she gets things done. She's got a reputation for property inspections, which is fancy talk for wandering onto private property without permission to look for violations. The smell of her expensive hand sanitizer can't quite mask the entitlement that follows her around like a cloud of judgment. Brenda didn't start out as the villain. She was just a regular homeowner who got elected to the HOA board 5 years ago. But power corrupts, and absolute power over lawn heights corrupts absolutely. What began as reasonable community standards slowly morphed into an oppressive regime where Brenda and her patrol team felt entitled to enter private property whenever they pleased. I first noticed something was wrong about 6 months ago. I was grilling burgers in my backyard when I heard rustling in the bushes. I turned around to see Brenda and 2 other HOA patrol members walking through my side gate, which was locked. They claimed they were conducting a routine inspection of my property for possible covenant violations. When I politely asked how they got through my locked gate, Brenda just smiled and said, "We have master keys for all properties in the community." I checked the HOA bylaws that night. There was no provision for master keys. In fact, Georgia law is crystal clear. HOAs cannot enter private property without permission except in cases of emergency. That was just the beginning. Over the next few months, the HOA patrols became more frequent and more invasive. They'd show up unannounced, climb over fences, and wander through backyards taking pictures of anything they deemed a violation. A flower pot slightly outside designated areas? $250 fine. A basketball hoop that wasn't taken down at night? Another $250. A bird feeder that attracted excessive wildlife? You get the picture. The worst part wasn't the fines, it was the invasion of privacy. My teenage daughter was changing in her bedroom one afternoon when she noticed Brenda peering through her window with a camera. When confronted, Brenda claimed she was documenting potential safety hazards. Safety hazards? A teenage girl changing clothes is a safety hazard now? I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, but Brenda's husband sits on that board, so my complaint went nowhere. I contacted the local police, but they said it was a civil matter unless physical damage occurred. I consulted a lawyer, but the consultation alone cost $350, and litigation would cost thousands more. That's when Pop got involved. Pop doesn't say much, but when he does, people listen. He grew up during a time when neighbors respected each other's property lines, and knocking on the door was the only acceptable way to enter someone's yard. When he heard about Brenda's antics, he just shook his head and said, "This ain't right, Ben, not right at all." Pop didn't confront Brenda directly. He didn't post angry rants on Nextdoor. He didn't file more complaints with the HOA. Instead, he did what he does best. He assessed the problem, identified the weaknesses in the system, and engineered a solution. You see, Pop has always been a firm believer in non-lethal deterrence. During his career as an electrician, he worked on security systems for everything from banks to nuclear facilities. He knows exactly how to design systems that protect property without causing harm. The first time Brenda and her patrol team tried to enter our property after Pop got involved, they got a mild shock, nothing dangerous, just enough to make them jump back and question what had happened. They thought it was a freak accident, static electricity maybe? The second time, they got a stronger shock that made their golf cart's electronics malfunction. Brenda was furious. She posted on the neighborhood Facebook group about how our property was dangerous and posing a threat to community safety. The third time, when they tried to climb our fence again, this time with a video camera to document the hazard, they got the full treatment. Let's just say Brenda's new golf cart now sits in her garage with fried electronics, and she's been noticeably absent from our property ever since. Here's your first knowledge nugget. In most states, property owners have the legal right to install security measures on their property, including low-voltage electrical systems designed to deter trespassers. The key is that these systems must be clearly marked with warning signs and cannot be designed to cause serious injury. A properly installed system that delivers a non-harmful but memorable shock is perfectly legal in Georgia and many other states. What Brenda and her patrol team didn't understand was that Pop had engineered a system that was both legally compliant and incredibly effective. He installed warning signs at all entry points, used a specialized transformer that delivered a safe but startling shock, and set up the system to activate only when someone made contact with the gate or fence. The beauty of Pop's design was that it didn't discriminate. It didn't target Brenda specifically, it targeted anyone who trespassed on our property without permission. And because it was clearly marked with warning signs, there was no legal basis for complaint. But here's what really made Brenda's blood boil. Pop didn't hide what he'd done. He made sure the warning signs were visible, and he made sure the HOA board knew exactly what he'd installed and why. He even provided them with documentation showing the system met all safety standards and complied with Georgia law. You know what? She was right about one thing. Pop did bring something back from his years as an electrician. He brought back the knowledge of how to protect his property within the bounds of the law while making a clear statement about respecting boundaries. While Brenda was busy playing the victim, I was building a case. I started documenting every trespass incident with time-stamped photos and videos. I gathered witness statements from neighbors who had experienced similar invasions of privacy. I researched Georgia property law until I could quote relevant statutes in my sleep. Here's what most people don't understand about HOAs. They have limited authority defined by state law and their governing documents. They cannot enter private property without permission except in cases of emergency. They cannot impose fines without following due process. And they certainly cannot send patrols to wander through backyards taking pictures of anything they deem a violation. I discovered something fascinating while researching Georgia property law. Under Georgia Code Section 44-14-161, property owners have the right to exclude others from their land, and unauthorized entry constitutes trespass. More importantly, Georgia Code Section 51-12(1) states that property owners are not liable for injuries to trespassers unless they willfully or wantonly cause injury. Here's your second knowledge nugget. Property owners have broader rights to protect their property from trespassers than most people realize. While you can't set traps designed to cause serious injury, you can implement reasonable security measures, including non-lethal electrical deterrents that are clearly marked and designed to prevent trespassers. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't Brenda's first rodeo. Through public records requests, I discovered that Brenda's previous HOA in another Atlanta suburb had paid a $75,000 settlement to a homeowner she had harassed for 2 years. She'd left that community when the new HOA board voted to remove her from the patrol committee. Meanwhile, Brenda was spreading rumors about Pop and me. She told neighbors we were dangerous and unstable for installing electrical weapons on our property. She organized a petition demanding the HOA take action against us, complete with photos of the warning signs that made our property look like a high-security facility. But while she was busy playing the victim, I was making allies. I connected with other homeowners through neighborhood meetings and discovered a pattern. Brenda's patrol team had been entering private properties without permission for years, documenting minor violations to justify fines while ignoring actual safety concerns. I partnered with my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, whose property they had entered while she was in the shower. I met David Chen, whose family had been fined $1,200 for having a cultural shrine in their front yard that Brenda deemed non-conforming. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic pattern of harassment that had been going on for years. The vibration of golf cart tires through my backyard became a daily reminder of what I was fighting for. Every evening, I documented the trespassing incidents while Pop quietly maintained his security system. But I was also preparing for the legal battle I knew was coming. I installed security cameras at all property boundaries, making sure they were visible and accompanied by signs stating "video surveillance in use." I gathered documentation of all previous trespass incidents. I consulted with a property rights attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. The smell of freshly cut grass, mixed with the faint ozone scent of Pop's electrical system, reminded me every morning that I was fighting for something important, not just my property rights, but the rights of every homeowner in our community. Then, I got the certified letter. Brenda had filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, claiming our electrical system was dangerous and posing an unreasonable risk to community safety. The hearing was scheduled in just 10 days. Brenda's quote in the neighborhood newsletter made her strategy crystal clear. "We must protect our community from those who would endanger others with reckless security measures." But as I stood at my bedroom window that night watching fireflies dance in the twilight, I realized something important. Those weren't just fireflies lighting up the darkness. They were opportunity. Brenda went nuclear. She organized an emergency HOA meeting to address the safety hazard on my property. She brought in experts who claimed Pop's system violated multiple safety codes. She circulated photos that made our property look like a military installation. The local neighborhood Facebook group was flooded with posts from Brenda's supporters claiming we were terrorizing the community with our electrical weapons. But Pop and I had done our homework. We knew exactly what we were legally allowed to do, and we had documentation to prove it. While Brenda was busy playing the victim on social media, I was discovering that her entire patrol operation was built on shaky legal ground. The HOA bylaws didn't authorize random property inspections. Georgia law required specific procedures for imposing fines. And Brenda's patrol team had no legal authority to enter private property without permission. The taste of bitter irony wasn't lost on me. They'd been violating our privacy for months, and now they were claiming we were the ones endangering community safety. Brenda's panic was starting to show. She offered to drop the complaint if we removed the electrical system and paid a $500 safety compliance fee. When I refused, she tried to pressure the HOA board to impose daily fines until we complied. That backfired spectacularly. Several board members who had been uncomfortable with Brenda's tactics but afraid to speak up saw an opportunity to push back. They scheduled a special meeting to review HOA patrol policies. But while Brenda was busy making enemies, I was building a coalition. I partnered with property rights attorney Sarah Williams, who specialized in HOA disputes. Together, we formed a neighborhood committee dedicated to reforming HOA practices. David Chen brought historical documentation showing his family had faced similar harassment in other communities. Mrs. Jenkins provided testimony about the invasion of privacy she'd experienced. The local property rights organization was particularly interested to learn that Brenda's patrol team had been entering properties without permission for years. Turns out, violating privacy rights tends to get legal attention real fast. During my evening walks around the property, I discovered something beautiful. Pop's electrical system wasn't just a deterrent, it was a conversation starter. Neighbors who had previously been too intimidated to speak up about HOA overreach began stopping by to ask about the system and share their own stories. The buzz of the low-voltage current through the fence became a symbol of resistance against unreasonable authority. I calculated the materials needed for Pop's system: 1 transformer, 300 feet of insulated wire, and 10 warning signs. The cost? Less than $400. The impact? Priceless. The math was perfect, but the timing had to be precise. Using my smartphone for documentation, I mapped the exact locations where the HOA patrols had entered our property. 7 distinct entry points had been used over the past 6 months. 3 of them had occurred while we were away on vacation. Here's the beautiful part. Brenda's patrol team thought they were being discreet, but their movements followed predictable patterns. They always entered from the same directions, always at the same times, always looking for the same minor violations. Meanwhile, Pop's system was engineered specifically to deter trespassers while complying with all safety regulations. Then, Brenda made her biggest mistake. She organized what she called a safety demonstration, where she would show the HOA board how dangerous our electrical system was by deliberately touching the gate. Pop and I watched from the porch as Brenda approached the gate, flanked by 2 board members and a neighborhood photographer. She was wearing rubber-soled shoes, clearly thinking she was protected. But she didn't realize that the system was designed to bypass that protection through capacitive coupling. As Brenda reached for the gate, Pop calmly said, "Ma'am, I'd advise against that. The signs are there for a reason." Brenda smirked. "Don't worry, old man. I know all about your little shocker. It's harmless." She grabbed the gate and jumped back with a yelp as the system delivered its non-lethal but memorable shock. The photographer captured the entire moment. Brenda recoiling from the gate, her face a mixture of shock and embarrassment. Here's the kicker. Brenda had just demonstrated exactly why the system was necessary. She had deliberately trespassed on our property to prove a point, and the system had worked exactly as designed. The video went viral in the neighborhood. Suddenly, everyone was talking about HOA overreach and property rights. Pop's reaction was perfect. He walked over to Brenda, who was still recovering from the shock, and said, "Ma'am, I told you not to touch it. The signs are there for a reason. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a porch to sit on." As Brenda stormed off, vowing legal action, Pop just shook his head and returned to his rocking chair. "Some folks," he said, "just don't understand the concept of private property." While digging through neighborhood records for the third time that week, I found a misfiled document that changed everything. Buried behind a stack of meeting minutes was the original HOA covenant from 1987, the year Pop built our house. The language was beautiful in its simplicity. Property owners shall have exclusive control over their lots, and the association shall not enter private property without prior written consent except in cases of emergency. This wasn't just permission to protect our property, it was a legal obligation that superseded any later amendments Brenda had pushed through. But Sarah Williams's investigation uncovered something even more damaging. The HOA's insurance policy contained a clause stating that the association would not be liable for injuries sustained during unauthorized entry onto private property. Here's your third knowledge nugget. HOAs often have insurance policies that specifically exclude coverage for injuries sustained during unauthorized property inspections. This means that when HOA patrols enter private property without permission and get hurt, the HOA isn't covered and neither is the homeowner, as long as the security measures are legal and properly marked. The deeper we dug, the more the whole scheme unraveled. Brenda's husband wasn't just a county commissioner. He was receiving kickbacks from the HOA management company for pushing through policies that increased fines and generated more revenue. And here's the kicker. He'd never recused himself from any HOA decisions that benefited his financial interests. Sarah shared findings from the State Property Rights Office that made my blood boil. Brenda's patrol team had entered at least 27 properties without permission over the past year. In several cases, they had entered homes while residents were away, claiming they were checking for potential safety hazards. They weren't just harassing homeowners, they were violating basic privacy rights. But the real smoking gun came from Sarah's insurance contacts. The HOA's liability insurance policy explicitly stated that coverage would be voided if the association engaged in unauthorized property entry. That's when I found Pop's handwritten notes in his workshop. His 2018 entry broke my heart. Fixed Mrs. Jenkins's porch light today. That's what neighbors do. The electrical system was never about revenge. It was about establishing clear boundaries and protecting privacy. Reading those notes, I realized what Brenda had really stolen. It wasn't just our privacy, it was the sense of community that Pop had built one neighbor at a time. My research confirmed what I'd suspected. Brenda's patrol policy was creating a climate of fear and mistrust in the neighborhood. People were afraid to leave their houses, worried they'd return to find the HOA had entered their property and issued fines for minor violations. The timeline pressure was mounting. The HOA hearing was scheduled in 5 days. If I waited for the legal system to grind through appeals and complaints, Brenda would continue her harassment campaign. But if I acted now, I could use the hearing to expose the truth about HOA overreach and establish clear boundaries for the entire community. Standing at the fence that evening, watching fireflies light up the darkness, the moral clarity hit me like a lightning bolt. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring the natural order of neighborly respect that had sustained this community for generations. Brenda had systematically destroyed the local sense of community. David Chen's family had been forced to remove their cultural shrine. Mrs. Jenkins had installed security cameras in her bathroom after the shower incident. 3 other families were considering moving because they couldn't handle the constant harassment. But the state property rights investigator was scheduled to visit next month. Perfect timing. If I could demonstrate the pattern of unauthorized entries before their inspection, it would prove the HOA was operating outside legal boundaries. The smell of freshly cut grass and the faint hum of Pop's electrical system reminded me that this infrastructure was built to last. Pop had designed it for exactly this moment, when someone would need to stand up for property rights and community respect. As fireflies continued their dance in the twilight, I made the decision that would change everything. Time to honor Pop's legacy and establish clear boundaries. You don't just install an electrical fence without a plan. This wasn't revenge. It was a strategic operation with legal cover, community support, and historical justification. First, I assembled my team. Sarah Williams coordinated the legal strategy, filing additional complaints to ensure maximum attention when the hearing occurred. David Chen documented years of cultural harassment, providing historical testimony about how Brenda's policies targeted minority homeowners. Mrs. Jenkins offered her property as a staging area for neighborhood meetings and brought credibility as the community's longest residing homeowner. Sarah's legal strategy was brilliant. She filed a formal complaint with the State Property Rights Office, arguing that the HOA was violating Georgia trespassing laws through its patrol policies. Here's a crucial knowledge nugget. HOA patrol policies must comply with state trespassing laws. In Georgia and most states, HOAs cannot enter private property without permission except in cases of emergency. Any policy that authorizes random property inspections is likely illegal. My documentation strategy was meticulous. I created a detailed timeline of all trespass incidents with supporting evidence, time-stamped security footage, witness statements from affected homeowners, copies of HOA communications, relevant sections of Georgia property law, documentation of POP's legally compliant security system. The evidence was calculated to demonstrate a pattern of harassment while showing that our response was reasonable and lawful. Safety was paramount. POP's system included multiple safeguards: clearly visible warning signs, non-lethal voltage levels, automatic shutoff in case of prolonged contact, regular safety inspections. This wasn't some reckless security measure. It was a carefully designed system that complied with all safety regulations. Sarah contacted local media outlets about the growing controversy. David arranged for civil rights organizations to attend the HOA hearing. The strategy was simple: control the narrative before Brenda could spin it as dangerous homeowner terrorizes neighborhood. Our intelligence network was surprisingly effective. Mrs. Jenkins monitored HOA activity through the neighborhood grapevine. The local coffee shop barista, who happened to be David's cousin, reported on HOA board meetings. While I was building the case against Brenda's patrol policies, Sarah was waging legal warfare. She contacted the HOA's insurance company with evidence of policy violations, arranged for state regulators to review HOA practices, and prepared a class action lawsuit on behalf of affected homeowners. The beauty was in the timing coordination. The HOA hearing was scheduled for next week. The state property rights investigator was visiting the following week. Neighborhood support was growing daily. A perfect storm of community outrage, regulatory oversight, and legal pressure, all converging at exactly the right moment. But I knew Brenda's psychology. She always escalated when pressured, so I prepared for her predictable responses: emergency board meetings, media smear campaigns, probably a restraining order filed through her connections. Sarah drafted preemptive legal responses to each expected attack. The evidence preservation was crucial. I compiled comprehensive documentation of all trespass incidents, recorded video testimony from affected homeowners, and gathered historical photographs showing the neighborhood before Brenda's reign of terror. Sarah secured everything in official complaints for legal protection. Safety protocols included coordination with local authorities, communication with neighbors about the legal security system, and detailed notices explaining our rights and the system's operation. The legal warfare was Sarah's specialty. She tipped off state regulators about HOA violations, contacted the Georgia Attorney General about potential civil rights violations, and prepared a RICO lawsuit alleging a pattern of racketeering. Here's another knowledge nugget. Coordinated regulatory pressure often forces settlement faster than individual lawsuits. When multiple agencies investigate simultaneously, defendants can't fight on all fronts. The smell of fresh grass and the faint hum of the electrical system filled the evening air as I reviewed all the documentation one last time. Everything was in order. Pop had built this system to last, and our case was rock solid. I stocked the farmhouse with supplies for a potential confrontation, knowing Brenda would try everything to stop us. Sarah filed protective orders preventing retaliation against homeowners who spoke out. As I stood at the fence for the final equipment check, watching fireflies light up the darkness, everything felt aligned. The HOA hearing was in 3 days. The state investigator was coming in 5 days. Brenda was scheduled for a radio interview in 2 days, probably planning another attack on our character. The timing was perfect. The hearing would bring justice and establish clear boundaries for the entire community. Brenda's desperation reached new levels when she tried to have Pop's system declared illegal through the HOA board. These weren't just procedural challenges, these were blatant attempts to undermine our legal rights. My security cameras caught HOA board members trying to disable the warning signs at 2 a.m. One board member was caught on video attempting to cover the warning signs with black tape while his buddy served as lookout. Sarah had tipped off the local police, and Officer Ramirez was waiting in the shadows when they made their move. The arrest was beautiful. Mr. Board Member claimed they were protecting community safety, but it's hard to explain why you're covering up warning signs in the middle of the night. Brenda's media blitz was even more desperate. She appeared on the local radio show speaking in that trembling voice politicians use when they want to look like victims. Homeowners need protection from dangerous security measures, she told the host, not electrical weapons that could hurt children. But while Brenda was playing victim on the radio, my documentation was paying dividends. I had video evidence of every trespass incident, witness statements from multiple homeowners, and clear proof that Pop's system was legal and properly marked. Sarah revealed that state regulators had been investigating the HOA for months due to numerous complaints. These people were more desperate than I'd realized. The legal assault came next. Brenda fast-tracked an emergency hearing for the following day, clearly hoping to catch us off guard. But Sarah discovered the hearing violated proper notice procedures. HOA bylaws required 7 days' notice for disciplinary hearings, and they had given only 24 hours. If they couldn't stop the security system legally, they'd stop it through procedural manipulation. Meanwhile, Brenda organized a safety patrol to surround our property. 10 HOA supporters showed up with folding chairs and Protect Our Children signs, planning to live stream the removal of our security system. The optics were perfect for her narrative: concerned citizens versus dangerous homeowner with electrical weapons. But David had been busy too. He brought 20 neighbors to support what we called property rights protection. Jenkins organized a counter-demonstration with historical photos showing the neighborhood's original covenant. Sarah arranged for civil rights and property rights representatives to attend. Two competing narratives were about to collide: homeowner terrorizes neighborhood versus community protecting property rights. The procedural sabotage escalated when HOA board members tried to pass an emergency amendment banning all electrical security systems. This wasn't just harassment, it was an attempt to strip all homeowners of their legal rights to protect their property. This wasn't just about me, it was about establishing a dangerous precedent that would leave all homeowners vulnerable to HOA overreach. Sarah moved the state property rights investigators' visit up to coincide with the hearing. State agents would be present to witness whatever happened. But Brenda's final gambit was the cruelest. She contacted Adult Protective Services, claiming Pop was mentally incompetent and shouldn't be allowed to maintain the security system. The APS worker arrived at our house at 7:30 a.m. just as we were preparing for the hearing. I had to convince her Pop was mentally competent while simultaneously preparing to defend our property rights. Not exactly a normal Wednesday morning conversation. David called from work, his voice concerned. "Ben, this is getting serious. Are you sure you want to keep fighting?" For a moment, I almost cracked. Then I found Pop's final note about standing up to bullies, and my resolve hardened. Sometimes you have to electrify the gate to protect the porch. At 10:02 a.m., with state investigators watching and the morning sun warming the porch, Pop sat in his rocking chair while I presented our case at the HOA hearing. The sound was magnificent. Not the violent rush of confrontation, but the gentle hum of justice being served. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt like a community again, exactly as it should be. David knelt beside the fence and touched the warning sign, tears streaming down his face. "This is the first time I felt safe in my own yard in over a year," he whispered. Brenda's reaction was immediate and predictable. She screamed at the state investigators to shut down the dangerous security system, her carefully composed radio interview demeanor cracking like cheap paint. State investigator Mark Chen calmly explained, "Ma'am, this gentleman has the legal right to maintain security measures on his property as long as they comply with safety regulations." But Brenda was live streaming on Facebook, her voice rising to near hysteria. "He's terrorizing our children with electrical weapons. This is what happens when we let unstable homeowners have dangerous security systems." Except the security system wasn't threatening anything. It was operating exactly where it belonged, on private property with proper warning signs. Local media outlets covered the hearing live. The reporter was interviewing neighbors about their restored sense of security when Brenda tried to hijack the interview. "This homeowner is using electrical weapons to attack the community," she shrieked. The reporter, clearly confused, asked, "Ma'am, the security system is clearly marked and legal. How exactly is this an attack?" You could almost hear Brenda's narrative collapsing in real time. Brenda's husband was frantically calling board members, screaming into his phone about property values and political contributions. "That psycho is destroying our community," he yelled, apparently forgetting that Sarah was recording the conversation. Here's a legal nugget for you. Georgia is a one-party consent state, which means you only need one person's permission to record a phone conversation, and that person can be yourself. The legal validation was beautiful. State investigator Chen reviewed our documentation and confirmed it matched Georgia property law exactly. Sarah documented everything. This is how property rights are protected legally. State agencies prioritize legal security measures over HOA overreach, and we were proving that principle in real time. Mrs. Jenkins felt safe enough to remove the security cameras from her bathroom for the first time in months. 3 homeowners reported feeling comfortable in their yards again. The local coffee shop owner brought coffee and homemade pastries to everyone, saying, "My daddy taught me to respect property lines. This is how it should be." Even some of Brenda's supporters began quietly leaving as they realized no one was actually in danger. Turns out it's hard to maintain righteous indignation when the danger you're protesting is just a legally compliant security system protecting private property. The legal pressure accelerated when the HOA received a cease and desist order from state regulators. All unauthorized property inspections were halted pending the investigation. Brenda discovered her own homeowner's insurance might be voided due to violations of the HOA's own policies. The financial house of cards was collapsing faster than a sandcastle in a storm. But Brenda wasn't done fighting. She called her husband in a panic. "Get the board to declare their system illegal now." Brenda's husband, apparently having learned nothing from the arrest of the board members, tried to pass an emergency amendment banning all electrical security systems. State investigators immediately intervened, explaining that the HOA couldn't override state law with their bylaws. Turns out, interfering with state property rights enforcement is a serious violation. The technical success was everything I'd calculated. The security system operated exactly as designed, deterring trespassers while complying with all safety regulations. No injuries, no property damage. The system stayed within its legal boundaries, exactly as Georgia law required. My documentation strategy had been perfect. The political fallout was swift. 2 HOA board members resigned publicly, stating they could no longer support Brenda's harassment campaign. "This corruption has made our neighborhood unlivable," one announced to the gathered media. "You're done." State investigators expanded their probe to include civil rights violations. Sarah told me later, "This is the smoking gun we needed for systemic change." But the sweetest moment came when Brenda realized her $15,000 in safety compliance fees was now worthless without her illegal patrol policy. She screamed at me across the fence, "You've destroyed everything! 50 families!" My response was calm, measured, and loud enough for every camera to catch. "No, ma'am, I restored everything. Your families can respect property lines legally just like everyone else has to." Brenda stormed off, threatening lawsuits that would never materialize. As David's extended family arrived with homemade food and cold drinks, and Mrs. Jenkins brought a traditional ceremony to bless the restored sense of community, I realized something important. This was never about revenge. It was about community, the kind Pop had built one neighbor at a time, one porch conversation at a time, one act of respect at a time. The media narrative had shifted completely. Property rights groups hailed the security system as a model for protecting against HOA overreach. The original dangerous security system story became community reclaiming stolen privacy. Sometimes the truth hums as clearly as an electrical fence doing its job. The HOA board meeting at 2 p.m. was packed tighter than a can of sardines. Media crews, homeowners, HOA supporters, and state investigators filled every seat with overflow crowds watching through the windows. You could feel the electricity in the air. This wasn't just a board meeting, it was a community reckoning. Brenda arrived with a small army of supporters, high-powered attorneys, and enough legal documents to build a small house. She traded her golf cart polo for a conservative black dress and pearls, playing the role of concerned community leader defending innocent families. I showed up with Sarah wearing a simple button-down shirt and Pop's old baseball cap. Sometimes the best armor is just being comfortable in your own skin. The room was divided like a wedding gone wrong. HOA supporters on the left clutching their "Protect Our Children" signs, community on the right with weathered hands and determined faces. Brenda's attorney opened with dramatic flair, presenting photos of the warning signs and claiming $50,000 in reduced property values from our security system. They wheeled in an expert who was happy to diagnose reckless endangerment based on newspaper clippings. "Your Honor," the attorney declared, gesturing toward me like I was a criminal, "this homeowner is using electrical weapons to terrorize innocent families. He's turned property security into a weapon of mass destruction." The room buzzed with whispers until Sarah stood for our response. She presented the original 1987 HOA covenant that legally protected property rights. State investigator Chen took the stand and testified that our security system complied with all safety regulations and was legally permitted under Georgia law. Here's your final knowledge nugget. Legal security measures that comply with state regulations always trump HOA policies that attempt to override those regulations. The key is having documentation that shows your system is both legal and properly marked. Then Sarah took the stand as property rights expert. Her testimony was devastating. The HOA patrol policy violated multiple state laws, committed systematic harassment of minority homeowners, and operated outside the scope of legal authority. Board members squirmed in their seats as state violations were detailed in their meeting. You could see them calculating whether their loyalty to Brenda was worth potential legal consequences. The breaking point came when Sarah called Brenda's husband as a witness. Under oath, he admitted to fast-tracking policy changes while ignoring legal concerns and revealed his financial stake in the HOA management company. When Sarah played the recorded phone conversation about destroying property values, he exploded. "This is a setup," he screamed, storming toward the exit. "We did nothing wrong." His own words captured on audio proved the conspiracy better than any prosecutor could. But the real emotional power came from community testimony. David described years of cultural harassment that made his family feel unwelcome in their own home. His voice broke as he talked about removing their cultural shrine to avoid fines. Mrs. Jenkins showed photographs of her home before and after the shower incident, her quiet dignity speaking louder than any legal argument. Local police testified that the security system was professionally installed with zero safety violations. Neighboring property owners confirmed their restored sense of security. Then Brenda took the stand for what became her final performance. "He's taking revenge on innocent families," she said, pointing at me with trembling fingers. "He's using psychological warfare against children." She claimed I'd threatened her safety and described the security system as terrorism designed to destroy property values and traumatize residents. When Sarah called me to testify, the room went silent. I presented Pop's documentation of decades of neighborly respect, explained our legal security system, and spoke directly to the board. "Your Honor, I didn't terrorize anyone. I protected my family's privacy that was violated for months by unauthorized entries." The mic drop moment came when Sarah presented final evidence, documentation of Brenda's previous HOA paying a $75,000 settlement for identical harassment. The state investigator stood and announced a formal investigation into civil rights violations. The room erupted as the scope of the corruption became clear. The board had no choice. They voted unanimously to ban all unauthorized property inspections, establish clear procedures for addressing actual violations, create a homeowner oversight committee, provide refunds for improperly issued fines. Their warning to Brenda was pointed. This board will not support illegal property inspections. As state investigators escorted Brenda's husband from the meeting while regulators served additional notices, Brenda found herself surrounded by reporters with nowhere to hide. She refused all comment and sped away in her golf cart, probably already planning her next move. I emerged to cheering crowds of neighbors, property rights advocates, and curious onlookers who'd witnessed justice humming as clearly as an electrical fence doing its job. Sarah announced the state investigation at an impromptu press conference, while David thanked me on behalf of every affected family. My statement was simple. This was never about revenge. It was about doing right by our neighbors and respecting property lines. 6 months later, justice hummed as clearly as the restored sense of community. Brenda's husband resigned from the county commission amid ethics investigations. Brenda faced $220,000 in civil penalties and filed for personal bankruptcy. The HOA management company paid $150,000 in settlements to affected homeowners and was banned from operating in Georgia. The HOA reformed completely, with new leadership focused on community building instead of harassment. My property value increased as the neighborhood became more desirable, a safe community where privacy is respected. The $12,000 settlement from the civil rights case went to a good cause. We established a legal defense fund for homeowners facing HOA overreach. The community transformation was the real victory. The neighborhood now hosts regular block parties and community events. Porch lights stay on late as neighbors reconnect. David's family restored their cultural shrine, now celebrated as part of the neighborhood's diversity. Mrs. Jenkins removed the security cameras from her bathroom and sleeps peacefully again. The local coffee shop became the unofficial headquarters for the Oakwood Estates Property Rights Committee, where neighbors plan community events and watch out for each other. The success exceeded every expectation. Property values increased as the neighborhood became known for its strong sense of community. The HOA became a model for positive community engagement instead of harassment. State regulators cited our case in new HOA guidelines that protect homeowner privacy rights. Personally, I found peace I didn't know I was missing. Pop still sits on his porch every evening, but now he waves to neighbors who feel safe and respected. Sarah and I, well, let's just say fighting for property rights together creates a pretty strong bond. The ripple effects spread across Georgia like electricity finding its path. Property rights groups use the Oakwood Estates model to challenge illegal HOA practices statewide. State agencies cite our case in new enforcement guidelines. I've become an unofficial consultant for communities fighting HOA overreach, and the phone rings constantly. We established the Pop Carter Property Rights Scholarship for high school students studying law and community relations. David's daughter, Maya, was the first recipient, and she's now studying civil rights law at Georgia State. She wants to protect communities across Georgia from people like Brenda. The annual Porch Light Festival celebrates community and respect for property rights with local food, education, and neighborhood activities. We raised money for a property rights legal defense fund that's already helped 12 other communities fight back against HOA overreach. My favorite part is kids playing in yards where they used to be afraid to go outside, enjoying a neighborhood that respects boundaries. Every Sunday, I visit Pop on his porch, and we watch the neighborhood come alive with genuine community. "Thanks, Pop," I tell him. "The porch is peaceful again, just like you said it would be." The Legacy Project ensures this victory lasts forever. The Oakwood Estates Property Rights Committee now oversees HOA practices, creating a permanent check against overreach. No one will ever violate these property lines again. But here's the beautiful twist. Brenda's previous HOA faced additional lawsuits based on our case. 89 families across 2 states filed similar civil rights cases. What started as one homeowner's fight became a movement for property rights nationwide. From Pop's porch each evening, watching neighbors greet each other with genuine warmth, I'm reminded that some fights are worth everything you've got. Sometimes you have to electrify the gate to protect the porch. But you don't do it alone. You do it with your community, your neighbors, and people who believe property rights belong to everyone, not just whoever has the best lawyers and the most corrupt HOA connections. If you're fighting HOA overreach, privacy violations, or bureaucratic bullying, don't give up. Document everything, find allies, and remember, the law is on your side when you're protecting your home for your family. Drop a comment and tell me your HOA nightmare story. I read every single one and reply when I can, because these fights are easier when we support each other. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about communities fighting back against corruption and winning. And remember, your voice matters, your vote matters, and your porch matters too. Next week, I'm telling you about the city that tried to seize my neighbor's community garden for a parking lot. So she turned their groundbreaking ceremony into a composting workshop during the mayor's speech. That's a story about a different kind of growth and how one gardener turned the tables on municipal overreach. Justice finds a way, and communities that fight together win together. Oakwood Estates porch lights shine bright, y'all, and they always will.